The opening line of your song is a golden opportunity to set the stage and to get people invested right away. In a way, we could see it as a type of hook. I think too often people have too narrow of a view of hook. And a part of it is that the term hook is an overloaded term, meaning when somebody says hook, there are actually many different things a hook can mean. You could think of it, so even chorus is technically a little overloaded because chorus is another word for choir. So sometimes you'll be in a chorus, and really what it means is a choir, but also a chorus is a song section. That's not terrible overloading. It's usually clear by context what you're talking about. But hooks are something that anytime you talk about hooks, people are always confused because whatever their singular version of hook they have in their head is, they're trying to understand through that lens, and it's like, no, not that type of hook. So for instance, some people think the hook is the chorus. So like hook equals chorus, because in some genres, that is how it's treated. I don't think that is, I think it's questionable that they ever even did that because it makes it unnecessarily confusing. And there's already a term for a chorus. It's called a chorus. So that, I don't know why they did that, makes it unnecessarily confusing, but that is a legitimate thing. A hook also can be a vocal hook in the sense that, say, in a post-chorus, there'll be a hook that the singer sings. It's very simplistic. It's catchy. It's meant to hook the listener, which every hook is. So that can be a sense of a hook. Another one would be, say, a guitar hook or a bass line or a piano riff. Very often, all of those operate as hooks as well. Most often, the guitar one, for whatever reason, is actually called a hook. But when it's bass, we call it a bass line. But really, they all function as the same thing. It is a memorable, short, musical thing that is meant to hook the listener. It's interesting, it's catchy, and it hooks you in. Think something like Seven Nation Army or whatever, right? That nobody gives a rip about any of that song except that technically it's kind of a bass line, but it's technically played with a guitar, right? Like they just beat that thing to death. That hook basically is that song. That's an extreme version, right? But that's another form of a hook. But another hook is the first line of our lyrics. It's a lyrical hook because that's your first chance, the first thing you're saying to hook a listener in to be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Or, oh, the song isn't going where I think it's going. Or, oh, that's an interesting stage that he just set. I wonder where this is going to go. And I think too often we don't think of it as that sort of golden opportunity. And I think we don't think of it from the other side, which is if our first line is particularly meh or bad, that can lose people right away. They won't even ever get to the chorus. Is it true that chorus lyrics are the most important lyrics of a song? Probably. But in stiff competition with the first line of your song. If there are lines, this is something that I forget who called it this, but they call it power positions. I think it's the guy who wrote Write Better Lyrics that said this, but he calls them power positions. And the idea is there are certain lines, there are certain lyrics that are just obviously more important than others. And the tendency is like the first line of something is a power position very often, and the last line. It's sort of the whole, everybody remembers how the game begins and how the game ends. Everybody remembers the beginning of your performance and the end. If you screw up in the middle, but you nail the ending, nobody remembers or cares half the time. But if you screw up the end, now you're in trouble. Everybody remembers, even if you played flawlessly, but then the last chord you ended on was screwed up. Everybody remembers that. So, and this is true of basically all things. So it's important to get the first line right. You can lose people right away. I know for me, certainly as somebody who cares about lyrics, there are many songs that I don't get much past the first line because they lose me with how ridiculous the first line is. And immediately I'm gone. I'm out, right? They say something silly or they say something I see a lot, especially with modern pop, where it feels like they think they're deep and profound, but they're saying stupid, vapid things half the time. Not always, of course, but some songs, it's just like, you can tell they think a lyric's brilliant. And you're like, no, it's like, are you 10? Like at 10, that might be brilliant, but you're like 35 and you sound like a 10-year-old. It's not brilliant. It's not profound. It's kind of like comments on YouTube, right? The ones that are like canned the same crap that everybody said a million times. Like, oh, he never misses, right? If you go to any comedy video, any comedy, the top comment that gets upvoted the most, almost always, is, oh, he never misses. And once in a great while, that's true, but come on, nobody never misses. And like, stop saying it the same way in the same canned response. Like this is why the term NPC exists, right? It's like, oh my goodness, the amount of people who will say the same comment and it still gets upvoted a million times. Like, oh yeah, oh, he's clever. Like, no, he says the same crap that everybody else says with the exact same wording and no creativity. But anyway, I digress. It's kind of like that. And maybe you know what I'm talking about if you are part of the YouTube crowd. And if not, start paying attention to the top comments of shorts of certain types, and you'll notice that you see the exact same comment over and over and over. Different people, same exact comment. Don't even change the wording slightly most of the time. But your first line in your song is important, and it's a golden opportunity, and it's one that we should try to take advantage of. And there's many ways to take advantage of the power of the first line. For example, one way to do this would be to effectively set the imagery for the song early, as the imagery will carry through the rest of the song. This is something Pat Pattison talks about, who was the guy from earlier. For some reason, I blanked on his name, but Pat Pattison is the one who talks about power positions, I believe, as well. Or is it Andrea Stolpe? It's one of those two. Regardless, it is Pat Pattison that talks about how colors essentially bleed down. It's like if you put paint on the top of your ceiling, gravity pulls it down so that it covers what's below as well. But that wouldn't work in reverse, right? So if you save your symbolism to the end of the song, that doesn't recolor the beginning of the song. It's sort of just a lost opportunity. But if at the beginning of the song you set the stage that we're on a New England ocean and we're looking at a lighthouse or something, that image will carry through the rest of the song. So early in the song, and first lines is a great time to use imagery right away, because that imagery will carry through. You would be surprised at how much imagery will carry through, where you could mention something like a green mountainside in your first or second line, and even if you never even allude to where you are ever again in the song, it colors everything. So it's a very powerful way to use your first line. Another way is to effectively set the stage for the subject of the song, right? Who are you talking to, and what are you talking about? What is the song about? Who are you addressing, if anybody? Are you looking at the man in the mirror? Are you looking at a significant other? Are you looking at someone who just broke up with you? Are you looking at someone who you don't know very well and is younger than you, as is true for the song that we're going to use as an example here? But as I sort of alluded to, or maybe said before, I do think that the argument can be made the most important lyric of your song is the first line of your first verse. Probably it's still the chorus, but the first line of your first verse is something that's very important. And the opening line of Fooling Yourself by Styx is a great example of how to effectively set a stage. And I think it's a great example partially because it's not overtly profound, might be how I would word this. It to me is a sign of, there's always this conflict as artists where, some people say, oh, simple is the best and simple is better, always simple. And that's one of those things where, like, if you think about it for 5 seconds, you realize that's a ridiculous claim. It's overly simplistic. That's not the case. And people sometimes say that with lyrics, right? They'll be like, if a 5-year-old can't understand it, the lyrics are bad. Everybody should be able to understand every single bit of it. It's like, well, sometimes to achieve depth, you have to risk losing some people. That's always going to be true. Like, it's just going to be lost on people. Some people just want a popcorn flick. And if you have any deeper meaning to it, it's going to be lost on people. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing to have deeper meaning. It's just, you have to acknowledge that in any art, there's always going to be a risk. The deeper you go, the more profound what you're trying to say is, the more layers to it. People are going to miss some of the layers, and that's fine. And so something that is maybe not talked about enough is sometimes a great lyric is not one that sounds overdone and super poetic with flowery language. Sometimes it is, to all the people who say a 5-year-old should understand it. Sometimes it is. Some of the best lyrics I've ever heard are stuff that is just not something a 5, 10-year-old would understand. It just isn't. And it's beautifully said. The word choices are beautiful. They're precise. They're vivid. They're great. But there's a depth to them that wouldn't be understood by somebody who's 5 or 10. And then there are other ones that say something that is simple, but it still communicates a lot. It still is precise and vivid. And I think the first line of Fooling Yourself is a great example of one that isn't particularly flowery or anything, but it is pretty effective for setting the stage, some good word choice, and is just a really good opening line or two of the song. So we will play it real fast and then we'll read it and dive in a little bit. So right away, setting that stage, you see the world through your cynical eyes. You're a troubled young man, I can tell. So right away we know who we're talking to, what the dynamic here is, right? He's talking to a young man who he sees as troubled, at least partially due to the fact that the young man seems to see the world through his cynical eyes, presumably by how the young man looks at things, how he talks about things, right? Your cup half empty, right? Based on the way you seem to see everything. You're always pessimistic. You always think it's going to go the wrong way. You always are, whenever something good happens, you think, oh, no, really, it's a bad thing and people did it for bad reasons. Oh, it couldn't be that the person actually did a kind thing. It must be that they wanted an ulterior motive, whatever. So right away, we have this stage set that this is a song from an older man addressing a younger man because, I'm 31. I wouldn't call another 31-year-old a young man because they're my age. You don't call somebody a young man if they're your age. I've seen 80-year-olds call 50 and 40-year-olds young man because relative to them, they are young, right? So we have the dynamic of older and younger. So it's communicating a decent bit right away, and it's setting the stage for really what this whole song is about, which is essentially saying that, no, there is reason to have hope. You're just seeing everything through cynical eyes. You have the whole world in front of you. You have all you're all potential, not actual so far. You have so many choices that could be made. And, the only one that can stop you is yourself. The most simplistic way to see this song is it's a rah, rah, go get 'em song, right? It's in that general kind of manner. That's the type of song that it is at its highest level. Right? If we're going to be super reductionist and make everything into, one of 5 categories of songs or whatever. So this line is not, there's no really big or difficult words here. It's not super simple, nor is it complex. It's certainly not flowery language. You could say cynical, right? That's a above 5-year-old word, I would say. Troubled maybe is another word that is like it's north of 5 years old. So it's not the most simple way that this could have been said. And I think that's good. You see the world through your cynical eyes immediately sets the stage in such a precise, clear way. It's not going too far into flowery language. It feels like it's just sitting just right. It's saying exactly what it needs to say. And that is something that we need to put more thought into, I think. How we can set the stage better right away in our song with the first line. How can we set up the imagery of the song, perhaps? Or in line with this example, how can we set the stage right away? Who's talking to who? What's the dynamic between them? What is the song sort of going to be about? With a little bit of oh, okay, that's interesting. Because I don't know about you, but the first time I heard this song, which actually was fairly recently, that line sort of drew me in immediately. I was like, oh, okay, you see the world through your cynical eyes. You're a troubled young man. I can tell. Immediately, I was like, all right, I want to know more. And that's not the default for songs for me. The default for songs for me is some like, okay, we'll see where this goes. So think more maybe about your first line of your first verse. If there are certain parts of your lyrics that are worth putting extra time into, one of those places is certainly the very first line of your song. Hey friend, if you found this helpful, something else you'll likely find helpful is my free 6-step lyric writing checklist. If you want to take the overwhelm and chaos out of lyric writing, and instead you want to write precise, vivid, and intentional lyrics that you're proud of, then be sure to check this out. It's at songwritertheory.com/lyric checklist.